Blessings and peace to you this day. I want to make a video about the church and specifically about the passage in Matthew 16, and I would encourage you to take a Bible if you have one anywhere nearby. Pause this and grab a Bible and look at Matthew chapter 16, where we see Jesus making a statement about the very foundation of the church. And this is a hot topic between Protestants and Catholics. And when you go on YouTube and other sites, you will find the majority of the interpretations are Catholic in origin and will declare that at the foundation of the church is the Apostle Peter. And this, again, gives them warrant for their dogma of papal succession. In other words, the idea that we have this long succession of popes stemming from the first pope, which is Peter, according to their scheme of interpretation. And I want to look at the passage upon which this is based. There are others, but this is the central text upon which they base this whole system of ecclesiology and papal succession. And it is resting on a key verse, but let me give you the context here. So if you have a Bible, I'm reading from the Revised Standard Version in this case, and I'm looking at verse 13 of Matthew 16. Matthew 16, verse 13, where it says, "Now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, 'Who do men say that the Son of Man is?'" That's a reference to himself, of course. "Who do people say that I am?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter replied, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the powers of death shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." Then he strictly charged the disciples to tell no one that he was the Christ. Now let's look at that central verse there again. Verse 18, "And I tell you, you are Peter." Pause. "You are Peter," in the Greek, Petros. And on this rock, in the Greek, Petra. Petros refers to a small stone, a little rock. Petra, a large boulder, a mountain of a rock. "You are Petros, and on this Petra I will build my church, and the powers of death shall not prevail against it." And the Catholics come and say, and this is not to bash any Catholics, any denomination, I'm rather challenging a misunderstanding that is so common and widespread, and yet again still remains wrong, a misunderstanding of this verse and what is taking place here. I find it interesting that it's so misunderstood, and as to why it's been misunderstood for centuries, that's a separate talk altogether. Personally, I think it's taken this way, at least in its original misinterpretation originally, for political reasons, because again this gives warrant for the power of the church and its control and its supposed infallibility over the people. But setting that aside here again, He says, I tell you, you are Peter, if you would look at that, and on this rock. But that is set again in a context. Interestingly, oftentimes when Catholic dogma is argued, the idea of context is brought up again and again, and certain things, certain dogmas are brought up in certain places in the Bible, and yet they will try to oftentimes argue this from a context and compare other passages. And so this is, and is that legitimate to view the context? Absolutely. In fact, it's essential, but we do need to truly understand what the context here is. Again, looking back to where I started in verse 13, you see that he's asking the disciples about people's perception of himself. Who do they say that I am? And they offer these suggestions, these possibilities. And then he poses a question directly to them, asking them, who do you say that I am? And the Apostle Peter, being the leader, being the outspoken one of the band of disciples, says, and notice how it words it here though, also here, Peter replies, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And that was absolutely and is absolutely true. And Jesus says this to him, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, Simon, son of Jonah. What does he say after that? Notice this in the middle of verse 17 here. Flesh and blood has not revealed this to you. In other words, the Spirit of God, God himself, has pulled away the veil and caused you to see who I really, truly am. And who is he? He is, as Peter rightly said, the Christ, the anointed one, the promised Messiah, the one they've waited for centuries. You are the Son of the living God, and in this translation, rightly so, Son, S-O-N, is capitalized, capital S. We are all who have believed in Jesus, sons and daughters of God, but that is rightly said and written down with a small s. Here, Jesus is saying, you are the Son, capital S, of God. You are divine, in other words. And Jesus blesses him. Blessed are you, because God has shown you this, Peter. In a sense, that's what he's saying here. God has revealed this to you. Flesh and blood, look there again at verse 17, has not revealed this to you. You didn't come to this conclusion because someone told you, because some rabbi explained it to you, because you thought it through on your own accord, but because the Spirit of God revealed this to you at some moment, who I really am, says Jesus. And he goes on to say here that since the Father has revealed this to you, the Spirit of God has revealed this to you, I tell you that you are Peter. Now his Jewish name was Simon, but Jesus, as he did with others, he gave them a new name, which is Peter, which is Little Rock. I tell you that you are Little Rock, and on this rock, big rock, boulder, I will build my church. Now, it seems to me, anyway, patently obvious that he's not talking at all about Peter. Otherwise, most likely he would say, and upon you I will build my church. He did not say that, but he's saying upon this rock. Well, what rock? Well, the obvious contextual answer there is that he is referring to the confession, the truth of the confession that Peter just made publicly before his brothers there. The truth of Peter's bold confession there that he just made. Upon this truth, upon this solid confession, says Jesus, that I am the Christ, the Savior of the world, I will build my church. The church of Jesus Christ is not built on a man, but it rests on himself and the truth of who he is. Even Peter himself said this in 1 Peter, if you want to turn there, which is towards the end of the Bible, end of the New Testament. Peter himself declares this and makes this abundantly clear that he is not the chief stone, but only a part of the structure. He's not the resting stone. In fact, he says that Jesus is the living stone, the true stone. If you look at 1 Peter 2 and verse 4, come to him, he says, he's making an appeal, to that living stone rejected by men. Well, who is that? That's Jesus himself. Rejected by men, but in God's sight, chosen and precious. And like living stones, talking about all the saints who make up the church of God, you see, there's Jesus Christ, who's that living stone, and we are the living stone. Yourselves were built into a spiritual house, 1 Peter 2 and verse 5, to be a holy priesthood, to offer your spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. If you go down to verse 7, it says, that very stone which the builders rejected has become the head of the corner, and a stone that will make men stumble, and a rock that will make them fall. He's talking about Jesus. He's saying Jesus is the chief stone, the capstone, the cornerstone, that central stone in the structure of the church, not himself, Jesus. And we also can compare this to another statement in Ephesians, if you would turn there. That's about the middle of the New Testament. Give me a moment to find my place there. Ephesians, and the second chapter, where he describes the church, that's the Apostle Paul who's talking about the church, as the household of God. I'm looking at Ephesians 2 and verse 20 now. Built upon the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Christ Jesus himself being the cornerstone. The church is described as a household. Just think of a building, a structure. And he says there, as the household of God, this structure rests upon the primary teachings, the apostolic teachings and persons of the early days, the first century. Those who were the apostles were the personal foundation stones for the church, if you want to present it that way and picture it that way. And yet he says, the Apostle Paul makes it clear, and he was an apostle as well. The apostolic era has passed. These were again the foundation stones upon which the church rests, its teaching, structure, and everything. And Jesus, he says, again, is that one cornerstone. Verse 21, Ephesians 2:21, in whom the whole structure is joined together and grows into a holy temple in the Lord. Isn't that beautiful? In whom you also are built into it for a dwelling place for God in the Spirit. It's a beautiful picture, beautiful analogy of a house, a beautiful temple, a structure that initially was grounded, the apostles' teaching, the prophets and the apostles, and Jesus Christ being that central keystone. That's what the Apostle Paul says. That is consistent with what Peter says. And of course, that substantiates what we say about Matthew 16 and what is going on in this context here. So the bottom line is Jesus is the capstone. But the answer to the question, well, what or who is the rock? The rock is the truth of what Peter is saying here with his confession. The truth of his confession is the very foundational reality, that rock, that Petra, upon which everything rests, not upon a man, but upon the truth of who Jesus Christ is. And again, it goes right back to the initial conversation. Who do men say that I am? And then, whom do you say that I am? And those who answer that question in the affirmative and understand that Jesus is indeed the Christ, the Son of the living God, are part of the household of faith. And they have, therefore, as it goes on there further, the ability to declare that God has forgiven you. I will build my church on the saints of God, upon the apostles, upon myself, and the gates of hell, the powers of death, will not be able to stand against them as they proceed forth. They have the keys to the kingdom. No man has the keys to the kingdom. Even if we were to say perhaps we were wrong, and perhaps in some sense Peter was being referred to here as being the rock, which I am not saying, but hypothetically let's allow for that. Certainly we can't say that it all rested on one individual, because again, we have other passages which speak about the apostles and the prophets. It didn't ever rest with one human being. And even if it did, again, hypothetically speaking, that does not in any way, shape, or form allow for a succession of leaders in line with the Apostle Peter. The whole notion of the current papacy going all the way back historically to Peter himself is historically untenable. It just simply will not hold up. In the early centuries of the church, there quickly arose bishops or pastors of provinces, special leaders that did seem to have great sway over regions and provinces. Whether that was a good thing or not is debatable. But the structure of the early church was really rather simple. The church was, by and large, simple groups of people meeting in informal settings, oftentimes in houses, and there are several houses that are mentioned even in the New Testament where different believers would meet. Of course, there were times of great persecution in the early centuries, especially the terrible one under Diocletian in the 3rd century and 4th century, and they had to hide. But again, the churches were simple, but in time they became more and more elaborate, and a hierarchy, it developed more and more and more, and what we see today is a very elaborate hierarchy in the Eastern Church and the Western Church. But the point being here again for our discussion is that it is the truth of who Jesus is, and believing that, trusting in him, that brings me into the Church of Jesus Christ and makes me a part of that structure that is so wonderful and true. I hope you find that helpful. I always encourage comments. Please put those in the comment section there. Like, dislike, whatever you want to do. And if you'd like to share this, please feel free to do that and repost it, okay? Blessings to you this day.